2 weeks ago, it said in the Parsha in Achri Mos, says that Bezos Yogo Aaron El HaKodesh. With this, Aaron will come into the Kodesh. It's referring to Yom Kippur. He enters into the Kodesh Bezos. So Rashi says Bezos, the Gematria Tov Yud. The numerical value of Bezos is 410, which was the amount of years that the first Beis HaMikdash stood. It was destroyed after 410 years. Bezos Yogo. I mean, what does Aaron have to do with the full amount of time? I mean, he passed away before the Beis HaMikdash was built. He officiated in the Mishkan. The Beis HaMikdash was only built more than 400 years later. But Bezos Yogo, Bezos is Aaron. Numerical value, Bezos, when he enters comes to the Kodesh, is 410, which is referring to the Beis HaMikdash. So we explained then that Justin says that the Ovos HaKadoshim, Avram Tikin, Shachris, Yitzchak, Mincha, Yaakov, Aris, each one actually promulgated each one of the tefillos. What does it mean they did? I mean, Chazal tell us that the Ovos HaKadoshim, the patriarchs, they fulfilled the Torah in its entirety before it was given, even rabbinic laws. So Avram Tikin Shachris. Avram didn't say Mincha, Avram prayed Mincha. And he prayed Mariv. And Yitzchak prayed Shachris because his father put it in place, and he prayed Mincha, but he also prayed Mariv. And Yaakov instituted Mariv, and he prayed what preceded him. But each one prayed, which before the following patriarch put it in place. So what does it mean? Tikain. Each one Tikain. He promulgated, he legislated it, he established it. What does he establish it? So we explained that when we have an audience with Hashem, the moment we take 3 steps forward, Hashem is attentive to us, and all the pathways of Rachim are open to be attentive to us. Why? Because all those spiritual pathways were opened by Avram in the morning hours. In the afternoon, this was Yitzchak. In the evening was Yaakov. They created an energy, a dynamic, that whatever impediments there would be, that the door is shut, they open the door. They open the door for all of us, for all their children. In the future, Jews pray in the morning. Why the doors wide open to have the audience? Because Avram opened those channels. Yitzchak opened the channels. They, in their own rights, had sufficient value. The Avos, they were open for themselves. They were able to have that audience. But how do you create the availability of that audience, even for people who don't have that level of status, like the descendants? That's the tikkun. Each one was tikkun whatever you promulgated, legislated what it was. We find that the temple period, first one, there were many things that were in place. After we went into Golos, the exile to Bavel, when we came back, there were 5 things that were not in place any longer. It was deficient. Spiritually, it was not at the same level. So the dynamic of the first Beis HaMikdash, the relationship was a different relationship. When you officiate, Hashem responds differently. Why? Because Aaron, when he comes into the Kodesh, he activated the energies, he opened all those channels that any Kohen who follows is able to actually to piggyback on what Aaron had done. That's Bezos Aaron HaKodesh. Although he didn't live, he wasn't alive when the Beis HaMikdash was built. But what is the Beis HaMikdash? It's a location of Avodah. So Avodah in the Mishkan, what Aaron did in the Mishkan affected everything till the end of the first Beis HaMikdash. That's the way I explained it. Over here we speak of the Jubilee year. It says that after you count 7 cycles of 7 sabbatical years, the 50th year, Ukrosim Dror. Dror means freedom. You call freedom over here. We're on Chafei Ches, V'safato Sheva Shapso Shonim, Sheva Shom Sheva Pomim. You count 7 cycles of 7, 7 years 7 times. V'hoyu L'chosh Yivei Sheva Shapso Shonim, and you have the 7 sabbatical years. Teshav Shana, it's spread over 49 years. It's not you count 7 sabbatical years, but rather every 6 years, you have another sabbatical year. What do you do in the 50th? And you have the trua in the 7th month, Vesel Chodesh on Yom Kippur, B'Yom HaKippurim, Taviu Shel B'chol Artzachem. Speak about this more specifically. V'kidashtem Eshnas HaChamishim Shana, and you will sanctify the 50th year, Ukrosim Jerobach Oretz L'chol Yisrael, and you're going to call Jerah means freedom in the land for all those in the inhabitants. And meaning, if you sell properties, the properties go back to original owners. Is freedom. If you have a person who was sold a Canaanite slave, the Canaanite slave returns to its original owner. An Eved Ivri, if he hasn't yet served 6 years, he goes free. If he was beyond 6 years, because he said he had the all put in his ear, which normally he goes till the Yovel comes, he's set free. That's crossing drawer. Why? Yovel he Tia Boretz. Also, each person returns to his portion. Each person returns to his family. Now, over here, so Rashi says what it means you declare freedom, lavodim, slaves, be'nirza, whether he had the all put through, lo sheishonim, mishinim kar, whether the 6 years were not yet completed. Okay. What is the drawer? Kimedayer be dairo. Like a person who has a right to live wherever he chooses. Meaning, although initially you're under someone else's dominance, its control, during the Yovel, you're not under anybody's control. You're a free person. So over here, the Balaturim writes, what is the numerical value of drawer? Ole Kiminion Tofyut. Drawer is also 410. Why? Remez Kiminion Drawer Shonim Shehu Drurim Boretz Meshinivna Bayis. It's alluding to the 410 years they were free in the land from the time the Beis Hamikdash was built. So again, drawer is alluding to the period of time the Beis Hamikdash existed. But what does the word drawer mean? You're free. What does that mean? So we explained at one time, we read in Pirkei Avos next week, we're going to read, it says that regarding the luchos, the Torah tells us the 10 commandments were choros ala luchos. They were etched, but the word choros without vowels can be read cheros, freedom. The only one who's truly free is the person who studies Torah. That's cherus. Meaning, if you have that special relationship with Hashem and you merit siyata d'shmaya, you have divine assistance to give you clarity, you're basically a free man. You're a free man. I'd said that by the Chet HaMeraglim, when the spies had come back and 10 came back with ominous reports, when did they come back? They came back Tisha B'Av night. And it says the Jews, they cried. So Rashi cites Chazal, because Atem Bechisim Bechiyah Shel Chinam, because you cried a cry, which there was no basis in the cry, because it was Eretz Zavos Bush. It was a land that flows with milk and honey, and there was no reason to cry. In the future, I'll give you what to cry about. What will you cry about in the future? The Churban Bayis Rishon Sheni, the first and second temple was destroyed. Since now you cried, there was no reason to cry. Because here Hashem says it's the ultimate, and you're crying because you see this is as being disastrous. I'll give you what to cry about. The Churban Bayis Rishon Sheni, the first and second temple. So I ask the question. I mean, why was the first Bayis destroyed? They violated the 7 cardinal sins. They didn't study Torah sufficiently. So they're crying because they failed. If you want to cry, I'll give you what to cry about. You're going to lose the Beis Hamikdash. But we lost the base Mikdash has nothing to get. God gave us what to cry about. Because we crossed too many lines, that's the reason why it was destroyed. If he takes away something for us that we really should have, I'll give you what to cry about. Because there, you should have it, I took it from you. But here, there's no reason to cry. So what exactly are Chazal telling us? What they're telling us is this: when they were in the Midbar, that a level of clarity was one of a kind of clarity. And you should see it the way Yeshua and Kalev saw it. It's a land that we're going to conquer. It's a land, it's the ultimate. If when I give you the clarity, you don't take advantage of that clarity and you choose to turn your back on me, I will remove that clarity from you and you're going to fall on your faces. Of course, it's because they sinned. But why did they sin? A lack of clarity. But if they would have had the clarity, they would have seen it clearly that they don't take that direction. But why did Hashem remove the clarity? Because when you had clarity, you abused it and you turned your back on me, you're not going to have clarity. And as a result of that, there'd be terrible, disastrous ramifications. That's the idea. Krosim Dror. Dror is 410. Freedom. During the 410 period of the first Beis Hamikdash, you had freedom, you had the availability of clarity. Not to be saddled with all the distractions. We made choices. Unfortunately, they were bad choices. And as a result of that, Hashem destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. But for 410 years, we had the chance that we could always pull out of the problem. We were being sucked down in the quicksand, but we had the ability to actually extricate ourselves from that. Therefore, the drawer numerically is 410. Similarly, Bezos Yova Aaron al Kodesh, that the dynamic that Aaron set in the Mishkan, that special dynamic, which was a special relation with Hashem, who lasted for 410 years, the period of the Beis Hamikdash. What is the consequence of not observing Shmita, sabbatical year? Every year they didn't observe the Shmita. We spent the year after Eretz Yisrael. The reason why we were in Golda's bubble for 70 years is because they did not observe 70 Shmitos. So I gave an example. The Torah tells us that when you sell property in Eretz Yisrael, maximally you could only sell it for 49 years. You cannot sell it biyaf on a permanent level. Why? Because the Torah says kili oretz. Later it says, of course, the land is my land, meaning you people are only like tenant farmers. We have a contract. Each family are tenant farmers forever. If you want to sublet it, the sublet only lasts 49 years. You can't dictate beyond 49 years because who's the landlord? The landlord is Hashem, Kili Oretz. He owns the land. So you as tenant farmers, it's yours forever. But if you want to transfer those rights, you can only transfer rights for 49 years. After 49 years, those rights return to you. So therefore Hashem says, that's the contract, that's the lease. What happens if you violate the lease? For every time you violate the lease, part of the lease is also what? Every 7th year, the land has to remain fallow. You have no right. You have no right to utilize the land. And if you do, for every time you break the contract, you spend a year, I'm going to dispossess you for a year. So because they violated 70 Shmitos, which means they acted as they were the owners, which they were not, because Hashem says every 7th year, it's considered owners. You have no tenant rights during the 7th year. So if every year that you took the tenant right, we have no right to it, I'm going to put you out of the land. That's what we spent 70 years in Bovel for that reason. For every year of Shmita we didn't observe, we put out of the land for a year. Okay? That's the basis. That's Chazal. So the land has to be satisfied before you come back. Now, seemingly, it's a little difficult. We read here in Parsha, Perak Chofei Posuk Yutes. V'nosna Oretz Pirio. The land will give its fruit, v'achaltem l'sova, and you'll eat to a sated point, v'shavtem v'etochaleo, and you dwell in the land with confidence, with security. Rashi, v'nosna oretz, v'shavtem v'etochaleo, shel tidagu mishnas batzoris. You don't have to be concerned that there'll be years that there'll be a lack of food. Batzoris doesn't mean a famine, but it borders on a famine. V'achaltem l'sova, that the food that you eat, the bracha will be even within your innards. Okay? If you're going to ask if the seventh year is ownerless and it's for everybody to take, if we're not permitted to plant, we're not permitted to harvest, as to a senu. So you'll ask a question, what do we need? I will command my bracha in the sixth year. And the sixth year, you're going to have a yield, a 3-year yield, which will cover you until the end of the 8th year. Rashi, l'shlish hashonim, l'tzas hashis mizeh, uzratem es hashon hashminis, and you plant in the 8th year. V'achaltem tzfua yosher, and you can eat the old harvest, the old grain, achon hachis, until the 9th year. Adbot tfuasa tochli yosher, until the new crop of the 8th year grows, you can have the 2 additional years, which is going to carry over from the 6th year. Okay? Now the question is, so why do they violate 70 Shmitas? You're running a practice. And I say, whatever money you can make in this practice for the next 5 years, and you put money in the bank up front, you don't have to work. Oh, you're going to go into the shop and work? The person says, there's no reason to work. I'm paying you up front 3 years in advance, and yet the Jews, they still didn't observe the Shmita. Does it make sense? I mean, were they that greedy? Here Hashem gives us up front. I mean, they reneged on the agreement. Here I pay you. So if that's the case, you have no right to what I gave you, because I only gave it to you because you're supposed to keep the agreement. He gives us up front a 3-year yield in the 6th year, and yet during the Shmita year we take in the harvest. The question is why? There's a person in Tehillim, it says, Baruch Hashem Alochav. Who blesses Hashem? His angels. So the question, who are the angels who bless Hashem? One interpretation is Moshe and Aaron. They're the equivalent of angels. Rav Huna b'Shem Revachom Eli Yisrael. Who are the angels who bless Hashem? It's Shu Omer, Gibore Koach Osedvoro. Those who have enormous power. They do his word, l'shmo b'kol dvaro, to heed the voice of his word. Sheidimu asil l'shmiya. Gibore koach, because we said nasa b'nishma, which is similar to angels. Angels, they do the will of God, and God, Hashem only has to give them the order, the charge. We accept everything. We accept unequivocally, just tell us what to do. The ones who observe Shvius, they are the Gibore Koach. Alan, this is the punchline. Why are they called Gibore Koach? They have enormous power. Person sees his field being treated as if it's ownless. And his trees are the equivalent of being ownerless. And the fences are breached, which initially built to protect the property, his toil. And he sees his fruits being consumed. And he suppresses his inclination and keeps quiet. Watching this happen, doesn't say a word. Who's the Gibor? The one who's able to take control of his inclination. Therefore, Klausel, being Shomi Shvi, is the Gibor Koach. Well, what's the point here? You see your food being consumed. You see your trees being ownerless. Your fences are breached. Your food is being eaten. But you were paid for it. You were paid for it. Now, it's a Chazal that says that Klal who leave Peyo, the Torah tells us that if you have a field, you have to leave the corner of your field for the poor. You have to leave the gleanings for the poor. Leket Shikl Peyo. Okay? So, Peyo means you leave a remnant. You leave the corner field. So, Chazal tell us, it's a Yalkut, Klal will leave the Peyo of the field. Therefore, at the end of time, there'll be a remnant of them. We're going to exist. The nations of the world who don't leave Peyo, they will not exist in the future. I mean, what's so unique about Peyo? The Jew who leaves Peyo, leaves the corner of the field for the poor, he will be part of the future. But the nations of the world who don't leave Peyo, they will not be part of the future. Now, if you say Gibor Koch, let's talk about Kabbalah Torah. Hashem offered the Torah to the nations of the world. When he offered to them, what did he say to them? Do you want to accept my Torah? So what did they ask? What's written in your Torah? What's it all about? Hashem says to Edom, they asked the question. What was the question? Is it our cup of tea? Is it not our cup of tea? Is it for us or not? When they heard what is this, it's not for us. Let's say they would have said it is for us. Why did they accept the Torah? On whose terms? On God's terms or on their terms? They would have accepted the Torah on their own terms. Well, Klaus said, Nasav and Nishma, on whose terms did they accept the Torah? Not because it fits our lifestyle or it's our protocol. Whatever you want, we accept. So therefore, even though we have no input,
release the money, keep the heat on.
nevertheless, we accept it.
Yeah, but Kiddush Hashem.
Alan,
I'm sorry.
yeah. That's the difference. Now, the halacha is you have tevel, which is discussing tevel, you have to tithe it. And you have to give the first portion to the Kohen, 10% to the Levi, 10% to the Oni Yud, Ma'aseh Sheni. When I give Truma, do I have a right to choose which Kohen I give it to? It's true, I must give it. But the Torah says you have a right to pick which Kohen you want to give it to. When you take Ma'aser, you have a right to choose which Levi you're going to give the 10% to. You take 10% to give Ma'aser Oni, the third and sixth year sabbatical year. You have a right to choose which one to give it to, which poor man to give it to. So as much as I have to give it away, I retain my ownership rights. I can dictate to who and when and where. What about Lekchik Pompeo? You must leave the corner of your field. Let's say the poor man, of course, he has to qualify, he has to be poor. The poor man is somebody, is an arch enemy of yours. Does he have a right to take the payer? He has a right to take it. You have no say in the matter. So the characteristic of payer is similar to Shmita, to Shvius. Just as Shvius, the Torah says it's ownerless. Anybody has a right to come in and take what they want, and you have no say in the matter. Identically, payer is the same thing. You have no right to dictate which takes and which only doesn't take. That means you give up your rights totally. Although you created that, you have no right to demonstrate any of your ownership rights, although you created that. That's something which is too difficult, very difficult to swallow. I come into your store and I say, how much does it cost? $100. And the owner says, but it's not for sale. And he says, doesn't make a difference. Here's the $100, here's $200, I'm taking it. He's a thief. And the owner says, I own it. I determine who gets it, doesn't. You're not taking it. A person to give up his rights. What is a person's identity? Your identity, who are you? But if you have no say, that means you're nothing. A person not to have an input and have a say in the matter, even if you want to pay me up front, I'm not agreeable. Not to have a say who comes in, who doesn't come in. As it says, your fruits are ownless, your trees are ownless, the fences are breached, and it's a free-for-all. Where I created all this, it's very difficult to swallow. That's Ezel Gibeah Kovish Yisrael. As a result of that, that's the reason why they violated, at some level, 70 years of Shmita. And therefore, we spent 70 years in Golus. And what does that teach us? You think you're the landlords, you're the owners, you're not the owners. I'll give you an example. Person works for someone, and he runs the cash register. And he sees all this money coming in. After a while, he starts believing that, he has a right to put his hand in the till. Every penny in that cash register belongs to the owner of the company. Or whoever's the proprietor of that store. You have no right to take it. Hashem says, you're on the take. For 6 years, you're no different than every other person who takes in the 7th year. Even that it came to you, it's only because I gave you the blessing. That's why for 6 years you had produce. But the way we process it's not that. There's an element of kochim yotzi yodi, it's our input. It's because we toiled for 6 years. We built these fences. And now whatever we did just goes into smoke. As if with nothing. They couldn't tolerate that. And that's what it says, that's why they're called Gibor Koach. Ezel Gibar Koach Yisrael. The Gemara says there's a Mishnah in Bava Metzia, which we studied. If a person is a shomer and a custodian, somebody gives you fruit to watch, or let's say you find the lost article. So the finder of the lost article of a Jew says you have responsibility of a shomer. And what he finds is fruit, which starts rotting. When do you have a right to sell it? Certain things you sell, because if you don't sell it, the upkeep to keep it is going to what? Is going to totally deplete the value of the item. Right? You have certain species that don't work. So if you have to feed it, and the owner of the item, of that animal, living species, has to reimburse you for the upkeep of it, it doesn't make sense that you should keep feeding it, because at the end of the day, you're going to return nothing to the owner because the upkeep depleted the total value of the item. Therefore, you have a right to sell it. You should sell it, because that's how you're returning the lost article, the value, to the original owner. What about if you have produce, and the produce starts rotting? At what point do you have a right to sell the produce? Because the owner may come back. So it says that if it up to a certain point, you have no right to sell the produce. Why? Because a person would prefer his own measure of grain that he came about through his toil than 9 of someone else's. So therefore, he doesn't want you to sell it. But you realize if I sell it, you can have a greater profit. If it goes and it rots, and I sell it when it's already in a decomposed state, you're going to get less money. Doesn't make a difference. Up to a point, I prefer to take the loss because at least it's mine. I created that. So Rashi says, what is it all about? Anything a person toils for and you sacrifice for you have a special love for that. That's considered something special to you. Something that you don't toil for is not special. That's Rashi. That's why you prefer something which is only 1/9 value versus something else, because that's you created that. Because you put your sweat and blood into that. Because torachba, that's the understanding. And that's basically what this is. You pay me 3 years up front, doesn't make a difference. But who am I? I have no say. That's mine. I created that. To give up something you created, it's like you want me to give you a pound of flesh. Can't give you a pound of flesh. Too difficult to swallow.
Rabbi, when we have the concept of
My position is called yukum. Yukum. Because a person stands on his feet when he has possessions. You're able to stand proud. I am. You take a person, his possessions away from him, he doesn't stand secure on his feet any longer. Because you don't have the same level of confidence anymore. We say, Ani choshev kemes. God forbid, if a person has to come on to other people for his existence, what are you compromising? That means you're not a self-earner. Whatever you can't bring about your own support. Person says, so thank God, I've never taken anything, I don't need anybody. Oh, I only need Hashem. Okay. That's your security. That gives you your confidence. But if you don't have it, therefore, asataser, to give it away. I once told over a story, phenomenal story. The Alter of Navardik, like there was the Alter of Sabbatical, Alter of Kelm, there's an Alter of Navardik. His name is Rabbi Horowitz. He established a network of yeshivas in Europe called Navardik. And the yeshiva fell on hard times. They didn't have literally money for fuel, for wood to put in the oven. The students, literally, they were eating like stale bread and water. They had very little. And the Alter of Navardik felt that he has to make a trip to the United States to raise money. So he had heard that he has a Talmud by the name of Moshe. That's what he was known as, Moshe. He became a very wealthy man. He lives in Harlem. In New York, Harlem was a very exclusive area in the early part of the 20th century. All the wealthy people live there. And he's going to go to New York and he's going to seek out his student, Moshe, and he'll be able to deal with the deficit by contributing. The Alter of Navardik wasn't a professional fundraiser, but you got to do what you got to do. Gets on the boat. He's on the boat for 6 weeks, gets off the boat, doesn't speak English, doesn't know, he only knows the word Harlem. Gets into the taxi, and he says to the cab driver, Harlem, okay? Goes to take the Harlem, how's he going to find Moshe? How is he going to find him? So he figured that Moshe will have a mezuzah on his doorpost. So he's going to go from house to house, say, no, if it has a mezuzah, it's a Jew. He'll knock on the door, they'll open the door, he'll say, Moshe. And his name is Moshe Schwartz. Schwartz was his name, Moshe Schwartz. So he sees him, knocks on the door, Moshe Schwartz. They slammed the door in his face. It's not Moshe Schwartz. And he goes from door to door. Music says, finally he comes to a door. He had a sense, because he heard he was a very wealthy man. That was a very prominent looking house. He knocks on the door. An Irish maid, housekeeper, opens the door. She's wearing a starched uniform. She looks like a real shiksa, Irish shiksa. Opens the door, and he says, Moshe Schwartz. The moment she sees him and sees this archaic-looking man, she goes and she slams the door in his face. But he had a feeling this is the house. So what does he do? He puts his foot in the door. He doesn't let her close the door. So right away, when this happens, she starts screaming, Master Morris, Master Morris. Here, all of a sudden, there was a duplex. He looks up and he sees Moshe Schwartz on the upper level, bareheaded, no beard, sideburns above the ear. Looks like a goy. So Moshe, the Alter, the Baruch says, Moshe is a goy. And he sees his Rebbe, comes running down, greets him at the door. They sit at the dining room table. And he speaks in Yiddish to him. He says, what happened to you? You became a goy. No beard, no payas. Your head's uncovered. You don't have kosher in your house. What's happened to you? So for 3 hours, he laced into him to the point that he committed himself. He'll be a Shomer Shabbos, he'll be kosher, he'll whatever it is, he won't use a straight blade to shave, everything else. So after he finishes admonishing and rebuking him for everything, so he says to his Rebbe, why did you come? So he starts explaining to him why he came. They didn't have what to eat, they didn't have fuel for to heat the base medrash. He writes him a check for $25,000, which was an enormous amount of money. He goes back for 2 years. It's easy streets, as they used to say. Everything's great. 2 years later, they need a refuel. So they had a professional fundraiser. And they felt, said a fundraiser who's trained in this area says that if the Rosh Hashiva, who's not even a trained fundraiser, comes back $25,000, you can imagine what I'll come back with. And he's going to visit Moshe Schwartz. So he he has the address, goes there, and he accepts it very nicely. And he starts, and the fundraiser spends 2-3 hours talking to him, explaining him that the situation is almost as bad as it was. And after 3 hours, he writes him a check for $18. He's like shocked. So the fundraiser says to him, I want to ask you a question. The Rosh Hashiva was here, you wrote him a check for $25,000. I come, $18, it's for the same cause. Where did I go wrong? There was something wrong with my presentation. Where did I go wrong? He says, I'll tell you the difference between you and the Rosh Hashiva. When the Rosh Hashiva came, and he says to me, all your money, all your accomplished is worth zero. Nothing. So if the money doesn't give me any value, so I could write a $25,000 check. But you spent 3 hours telling me why I'm so special because I'm so successful, materially speaking. So if my whole value is material, so if I give you my material, what am I worth? I'm worth nothing. That's the reason why I'm giving you $18. You understand? What's possessions? You come. Why do you stand on your feet? Because you believe the basis for your everything is your money. You don't give it away so easily. Therefore, the Torah says, Asa Tasa. You give it away, you're going to get it back in multiples. That's why Hashem has to give you that guarantee. Terrific story.